Good evening, Fiend fans, and welcome to my crawly crypt. This little drama is about one of life's unexpected pleasures. Dying, that is.
You know who this is? This is Crypt the Keeper. This is the person what Mr. Pogo ran away from last time we were in Hurricane Hall.
He crawled out of the late-night TV glow and straight into a barbed wire ring. In the mid-1990s, Japanese fans met a new kind of ghoul, Crypt the Keeper, a clear ripoff of HBO's wisecracking tales from the Crypt host. Only this one traded punchlines for pile drivers. Behind the mask wasn't a horror actor, but a second-generation wrestler who somehow turned a campy TV corpse into a blood-splattered icon of FMW's violent heyday. Wrestling has always borrowed from horror. The masks, the lighting, the violence. It's theater built on fear and spectacle. Crypt the Keeper, also sometimes blatantly called the Crypt Keeper, just made it obvious. The TV host Crypt Keeper turned death into a joke. Japanese hardcore wrestling turned death into a sport. Somewhere between those two extremes stood José Estrada Jr., wrapped in tape and barbed wire, playing a monster that felt strangely self-aware, like the horror host who had finally stepped into his own story. It was grotesque, ridiculous, and weirdly perfect, a wrestling monster born from late-night television and baptized in barbed wire. Before long, the man beneath the mask would trade the blood and smoke of Japan for the bright lights of the World Wrestling Federation, but the Crypt Keeper would remain his strangest, most haunting creation. Before there was a wrestler called Crypt the Keeper, there was the Crypt Keeper, the shriveled, cackling host of HBO's Tales from the Crypt, a show that turned horror into high camp and moral theater. Airing from 1989 to 1996, it was part anthology, part carnival, each episode introduced by the Keeper himself, a puppet corpse with a sense of humor sharp enough to cut through his own coffin lid. He'd greet viewers with a pun, deliver a macabre story of greed or murder, and then send them off laughing as another sinner got their grisly comeuppance. For horror fans, the Crypt Keeper was more than a mascot. He was the voice of a genre learning to laugh at what scares them. The series adapted old EC comics from the 1950s, the kind that were once banned for being too violent, and gave them a glossy 90s update filled with celebrity cameos, neon lighting, and gallons of fake blood. It was horror as entertainment, with just enough sleaze to make your parents worry. By the mid-1990s, Tales from the Crypt had become part of the pop culture bloodstream, a late-night staple that mixed the cheap thrills of a slasher film with the showmanship of pro wrestling. So it's no surprise that somewhere, halfway around the world, a wrestler saw that cackling ghoul and thought, I could be him. And in the world of frontier martial arts wrestling, where men dressed as Leatherface and Jason Voorhees were already swinging chainsaws at each other, that idea didn't sound crazy at all. It sounded like box office. Before he was the man behind the mask, José Estrada Jr. was part of Puerto Rican wrestling royalty. Born in Puerto Rico in 1973, he was the son of José Estrada Sr., a respected veteran who made his name in Carlos Colon's World Wrestling Council. The elder Estrada was part of the Super Medicos, a masked tag team that mixed lucha libre flair with old-school territorial grit. Heroes in white coats who fought for honor, masks, and championships. Growing up in that world meant learning two things early: how to wrestle and how to disappear behind a mask. Estrada Jr. trained under his father and stepped into the ring as Super Medico 3, continuing the family legacy. In the small but fiercely loyal Puerto Rican wrestling circuit, lineage mattered. Fans didn't just watch the matches, they followed families, sons inheriting masks, names, and grudges. Estrada's early matches were classic territory fare, with audience packed tight and screaming for their heroes. It was a far cry from the barbed wire chaos he'd later find in Japan, but it built his foundation. He wasn't just learning how to perform, he was learning how to be a star. And that lesson, that a mask could be both a shield and a story, would follow him halfway across the world, to to a place where horror and wrestling collided. Japan's hardcore scene in the early 90s was a violent explosion of creativity and chaos. Promotions like FMW and Wing were testing the limits of pain, theater, and spectacle. Foreign wrestlers, often called gaijin, were essential to the ecosystem. They played monsters, mercenaries, and villains from beyond the border. Estrada arrived in this world and found reinvention in horror. As Crypt the Keeper, José Estrada Jr. became something else entirely, part wrestler, part slasher villain. Sometimes he was billed as Crypt the Keeper, other times simply the Crypt Keeper, a blatant, almost comical ripoff of HBO's infamous corpse puppet. But Estrada leaned into the absurdity with grim flair, donning an almost identical mask and bringing the TV ghoul to gruesome life. Eventually, Estrada would just wear a generic skull mask, but kept the name. In a world of barbed wire, thumbtacks, and fire, the Crypt Keeper fit right in. Estrada's compact frame and surprising agility gave him a distinct presence amid the lumbering brawlers of FMW. His in-ring style was gritty yet expressive, blending the sharp athleticism of Caribbean wrestling with the reckless spectacle that defined Japan's deathmatch scene. The Crypt Keeper debuted in 1993, splitting time between Japan's two blood-soaked promotions, FMW and Wing. It was in Wing where Estrada truly found his footing as a hardcore wrestler, throwing himself into barbed wire, glass, and chaos against opponents like Jason the Terrible, Leatherface, and the Headhunters. The matches were wild, theatrical brawls that blurred the line between horror movie and sport, exactly the kind of arena where a Crypt Keeper knockoff could thrive. Between these death matches, Estrada also made short tours through Mexico, even appearing in CMLL, and by 1994, he briefly returned to Puerto Rico for select matches. Estrada's run as the Crypt Keeper didn't last long in the grand scheme of wrestling history, but that was never the point. These personas were built to burn bright and fast, to haunt the mid-card, then vanish into memory. In promotions like FMW and Wing, characters like his weren't supposed to last. They were living special effects, designed to pop the crowd, spill blood, and disappear before the next explosion went off. But for Estrada, the role served a purpose. It gave him international exposure, sharpened his instincts in front of unpredictable Japanese audiences, and proved he could adapt to anything, even playing a rotting TV host brought to life. By the time the Crypt Keeper faded from Japan's deathmatch scene, Estrada had carved out a strange but valuable niche for himself, a second-generation wrestler who could handle both traditional wrestling and the extremes of the underground. That versatility would soon pay off. Within a few years, he would return to American television under a different light entirely, not as a horror character or parody, but as part of the World Wrestling Federation's expanding roster during one of its most chaotic transitions. By the late 90s, Estrada was back in North America, signed by the World Wrestling Federation, and inserted into a new role as part of Los Boricuas, a Puerto Rican stable led by Savio Vega. Gone was the mask and horror movie aura. Now Estrada played a street-level enforcer in denim and leather, feuding with biker gangs and street toughs in an era obsessed with factions. His time in the WWF is mostly remembered for one moment, being the opponent in Hall of Famer Edge's 1998 debut match, where a mistimed dive left Estrada injured. It's a cruel irony. For all the punishment he took in Japan's most dangerous matches, it was a routine television debut that hurt his career. Thankfully, although José Estrada suffered the serious injury, he did not break his neck. After taking some time off to recover, he returned to the ring for one final full year, before retiring in 1999. Even after stepping away from full-time competition, Estrada would make brief comebacks in smaller promotions, proving that the wrestler beneath the mask never fully left the business. Looking back, José Estrada Jr. sits at a strange intersection of wrestling's cultural map. In Puerto Rico, he was part of a family tradition built on masked heroes. In Japan, he became a horror icon drenched in blood and smoke. In the US, he was recast as an urban soldier in a company too big to care about the layers beneath his past. Few wrestlers embody that much variety in a single career, and fewer still vanish so completely afterward. The Crypt Keeper gimmick now feels like an artifact of an era when wrestling was still willing to be weird. It belonged to a time when promotions blurred the line between horror and sport, where monsters bled for cheers, and the audience wanted both realism and fantasy in equal measure. Estrada's version of the character never became a headline act, but it symbolizes something crucial about the global wrestling underground: the constant reinvention, the willingness to break the rule, and the way every gimmick hides both a story and a sacrifice. In the end, José Estrada Jr. didn't need championships to matter. His legacy, scattered across Puerto Rico, Japan, and the brief spotlight of WWF television, tells a story about the workers who keep wrestling's mythology alive, the ones who give their bodies and faces to characters that outlive them. The Crypt Keeper may be gone, but like his namesake, he lingers. A ghost from the era when wrestlers bled to make the audience believe.